This is an Introduction to English Grammar, Part 7, Noun Phrase Rules, about objects. This is for a course given at the University of Utah, and my name is Karen. The main points, we looked at these on the last presentation as well, is that noun phrases can act as subjects, objects, and complements. A general prescriptive rule is be concise, and subject is a grammatical definition not related to its meaning. Also, the general word order is subject, verb, object. We're going to focus on the last part of that one today on objects. Terms that are important for today are direct object, indirect object, and object of a preposition. Noun phrases happen in several possible roles or functions in the sentence. We looked at this list before, but this presentation will focus on the last three: direct objects, indirect objects, and objects of a preposition. I want students at the end of this presentation to be able to use the passive test to identify direct objects. Also, students should be able to state when an indirect object is inverted. Students will also be able to identify gerundives and infinitival noun phrases. The direct object is a grammatical relation, again unrelated to the meaning of the sentence. In general, the direct object is a phrase that expresses the recipient of the action of the verb. In sentences with general regular word order, the subject does something to the direct object. So sometimes I'll say to students, the subject does the verb and the direct object is the thing that gets done by the verb. Copulous sentences don't have direct objects, those have complements. Look back at the last presentation to remember what a complement is. Okay? The dog chewed the stick. This is general word order where we have the subject first, the dog, action, verb, chewed, and then direct object, the stick. Direct objects often come immediately after the verb. The pitcher threw the ball. However, direct objects do not always come immediately after the verb. My mother gave my brother a long speech about leaving the car windows open. One way to check to see if something is a direct object is to give it a passive test. Okay? Your book mentions that a good test for this is the passive test. If you try to make the sentence into a passive, the direct object from the first sentence will become the subject of the next sentence. Let's give this a try. They built a bridge. Passive version, a bridge was built and by them. We can either leave in by them or we can leave it off. So in both cases, when we look at this, the grammatical subject is the thing that occurs first. But the way it behaves, the way the subject behaves is different for an active and a passive sentence. We'll learn more about this in the chapter about active and passive sentences. This one passes the test, and so a bridge must be a direct object. The book on linguistics was very heavy. Heavy was the book on linguistics. Doesn't seem to work for us, so it doesn't pass the test. That means it's not a direct object. That means it's probably something like a subject complement. Here are a couple of examples from your textbook. Do both of the following sentences have direct object noun phrases, and what's your reasoning? So here we have Jane saw the president, or Jane was the president. Well, we're able to move the first one, Jane saw the president, to a passive construction. The president was seen by Jane. Yep, that passes our passive test, so the president must be a direct object. How about the second sentence? Jane was the president. The president was been by Jane. Nope, that doesn't seem to be grammatical in English. So that one again doesn't seem to be a direct object. It looks like a direct object, but in this case where we have a copula verb, I'd say, ooh, let's double check and see if that's a complement, if it's just giving us information about Jane. The indirect object is also a grammatical relationship that is almost always defined by meaning. Okay? So this one's a little bit different. The indirect object is almost always a person, and the action described in the verb doesn't happen to this person directly, but he or she receives some sort of benefit or harm from this action. So here's an example. Will you please set the table for your mother? Okay, the mother is not actually being set, as in, will you please set the table? The mother is the one who receives an indirect benefit. Indirect objects sometimes come near the end of the sentence. In this position, they are introduced by to or for. Here are a couple of examples. John gave a pan of lasagna to Garfield. Did you buy that ice cream for me? The longer the phrase, the more likely it is to be near the end of the sentence. Consider these two examples and which one feels better to you. The students gave their teacher, who had worked so hard for them during the school year, even though she had broken her leg and her arm, a present. Or number two, the students gave a present to their teacher who had worked so hard for them during the entire school year, even though she had broken her leg and her arm. It seems like the second sentence is a little bit better. In the first sentence, even as I'm reading it to record it, I kind of forget that it's not the end of the sentence and that I'm still going to have to use the direct object at the end. Sometimes indirect objects come between the verb and the direct object. In this position, they are not introduced by to and for, and in this position we call them inverted. Jimmy gave the teacher an apple. Mike read Ben a bedtime story. Sarah gave her sister a lollipop. So these, the indirect object is all three of these, it's in inverted position. If we want to put it in its regular position, then we must use to or for to introduce it. Jimmy gave an apple to the teacher. Mike read a bedtime story to Ben. Sarah gave a lollipop to her sister. Many example sentences about indirect objects have direct objects also. However, it is possible to have an indirect object when you don't have a direct object. Harry danced for his mother. The direct object here would be something like Harry danced a dance for his mother. Kimberly is constantly giving to her sister. There's something that she's giving to her sister. Maybe it's time, maybe it's money, but it's not expressed here, and her sister is still the one who receives the indirect benefit from that. Here are some examples from your textbook. Which of the following sentences have indirect objects and which are inverted? Okay, Keith gave Mary a present for her birthday. The professor taught those students linguistics. Kathy gave Sam a second chance. My daughter wrote this poem. The fabric is torn, and Mary feels tired. Let's go back to the first one. Keith gave Mary a present for her birthday. Let's do a test. Let's see if we can move around some of the items in the sentence. So Keith gave Mary a present for her birthday. We have three noun phrases that come after the verb. Now we have to determine, are they direct objects, indirect objects, or objects of a preposition, which we'll talk about in just a minute. We know something's an indirect object if it can be inverted or moved to its regular position. So let's see if we can move Mary, the noun phrase in the first one, to the end. Keith gave a present to Mary for her birthday. Yep, I can move it. That seems to indicate that it might be an indirect object. Let's try moving for her birthday and see if we can move that before. Keith gave her birthday a present to Mary. No, it seems like her birthday has to move with the preposition for. So that one doesn't seem to be an indirect object. So yes, in the first sentence we have an indirect object and it's inverted. Let's take a look at Mary feels tired. Okay, Mary feels tired. First of all, do we have a noun phrase that comes after the verb? Our verb is feels. Well, we have tired, which is an adjective, but it sort of looks like a noun phrase in this case. But it's not a person or a place or a thing. It's just giving us information about Mary. So no, it doesn't appear to be the indirect object. It is a subject complement with a linking verb, feels. Okay, how about my daughter wrote this poem? My daughter wrote this poem. My daughter wrote the professor this poem. My daughter wrote this poem for the professor. Ooh, it seems like this poem is not an indirect object, but a direct object instead. Verbs differ on whether they will allow direct and or indirect objects. Putting the incorrect number of objects results in ungrammaticality. The train arrived. Acceptable. The train arrived Mary. No, that doesn't seem to be okay. I like ice cream. I like Jennifer ice cream. Nope, that doesn't seem to be okay. Mary wrote. Mary wrote a letter, direct object. Mary wrote a letter to Carl, direct object and indirect object, and that still seems to be okay. So it depends on what verb we have for whether or not it takes a direct or indirect object. Let's talk about an object of a preposition. First of all, we have to decide what are some of the prepositions in English. Well, when I was a little girl, I learned something like, whatever the bunny can do with a log, that's the preposition. So the bunny can be on the log, under the log, next to the log, in the log, around the log. That was how I learned about prepositions. Okay? An object of a preposition is a phrase that follows that preposition. So here we have some noun phrases, Albert, the tunnel, and a dollar, that all come after a preposition. In the first one it's about, the second one it's through, and the third one it's for. So if you remember back to that sentence that we have for Mother's Day, that is an example of an object of a preposition, or maybe it was for her birthday. Those are examples of objects of a preposition. Find objects of a preposition in the following sentences. I'll meet you near the fence after school. Larry cut the bread with a knife. Put the box in the drawer under the sink. She delivered the prescription to the pharmacy in the mall. Ben went to the dance with Flo. So the first thing we have to do is we have to identify our prepositions and our noun phrases. So if we look at the first sentence, I'll meet you near the fence after school. So I is the subject, will meet is the verb. Now we have you that comes after it. Well, you is the direct object in this case. Then we have some additional information, near the fence and after school. So we have a noun phrase, the fence, and we have a noun phrase, school. And both of those noun phrases come after prepositions. So in this case, they are the objects of a preposition. Here are some additional information. Okay? Only indirect objects have the possibility to invert. When you try to invert the object of a preposition, the result is ungrammatical. Mary played a song for her mother. Mary played her mother a song. Acceptable. Al studied algebra for a reason. Al studied a reason algebra. Not acceptable. So even though for her mother and for a reason look very similar, only one of them is an indirect object. The other is an object of a preposition. Marguerite gave a hug to her lonely friend. Marguerite gave her lonely friend a hug. Acceptable. Ted drove his car to the reunion. Ted drove the reunion his car. Not acceptable. We also need to talk for just a second about verbal nouns and noun phrases. Your book discusses two kinds of noun phrases made from verbs. Remember, we look at noun phrases based on how they behave. So in this case, these look like a verb, but they behave like a noun. We have gerundives and infinitival phrases. Okay, so gerunds and infinitives. Gerunds include ing. Something like, his laughing like a hyena annoyed her. Okay, so his laughing like a hyena annoyed her. His laughing kind of looks like a subject and a verb, but it's not. The whole thing, his laughing like a hyena, is the verb, or is the subject, and annoyed is the verb. Her is the direct object. All that coughing in the audience disturbed the musicians. All that coughing in the audience is the subject. Disturbed is the verb. Infinitival phrases include the word to. So we have the verb in the infinitive phrase. To give up now would be foolish. Okay? To give up now is the subject, would be is the verb, and foolish. I would like to read the chapter again before the test. I would like to read the chapter again before the test. Okay, and here we have the infinitive form, to read. Okay, subject here is I, and then would like, could be the verb, and then we have the object, to read the chapter again before the test. So it can happen as either a subject or an object, where we have something that looks like an infinitive or something that looks like a gerund. Noun phrases can act as subjects, complements, direct objects, indirect objects, and objects of a preposition. Prescriptive rules say that a copula verb be is weak, so if you're writing for a stickler, pick another verb with more action. The passive test can be used to identify direct objects. The inversion test is what we use to identify indirect objects. Noun phrases are a huge part of grammar, okay? And learning these grammatical relations will affect a lot of what we learn later in this semester. So it's really important for you to understand how these noun phrases work.